You think you know someone, and then they go do something that changes your perception of them forever. Framed that way, you might think that the revelation that came about was one that placed a person in a negative light. No, like they showed their true colors. There's that sharp pain of disappointment by the fall from grace of someone we really had looked up to. And then there's confusion and anger, which comes from feeling like we've been duped, like someone has betrayed us. On the other hand, it could be that you think you know someone, and then in fact they exceed your expectations. They are way more wonderful than you first thought that they were, beyond what you could imagine. And then framed in that way, you might think of someone who went above and beyond the call of duty. And you see now how they truly walk the talk. And the way that you see them now has reached a new level. Well, in the gospel up to this point, as we have been going through Mark, and we get to today's passage, it's fair to say that the disciples thought that they were getting a pretty clear picture of who Jesus really was. They saw his power and his magnetic personality and his wisdom very, very close, up close. They were privy to the inside scoop because he was always explaining things to them, like in private, the stuff that nobody else understood. They also saw the everyday Jesus, that unglamorous life of a traveling teacher and miracle worker. The disciples had made a big sacrifice to get there. They had uprooted their lives. They had followed this teacher, and through his ministry, though his ministry was picking up steam, there were powerful miracles, there was maybe even conflict with religious leaders, and there was a devoted following growing and growing. I think the disciples thought that they were really hitting their stride. Jesus had taught them and had empowered them to heal and to teach, and they had gone out and they had done it. They thought they had figured out exactly what it meant to follow Jesus. Things were exciting at times they were unpredictable, but they felt things were going pretty well. And then we get to today's story. And from here on out, the mood in this gospel narrative changes. Here we are in a gospel that is 16 chapters long, and right there in the middle comes this turning point. Jesus asks the people, "Who do you think that I am? Who do people say that I am?" And there was an implied question in the subtext. Why do you think I'm here? And so they yelled out the answers, as you heard. They were talking about being a prophet or being a Messiah. And so that means, Jesus, you are here to speak truth to power. Jesus, you are here to lead us to freedom. And then Jesus shushed them and said, keep your voice down. Gather around. Let me tell you the plan. Oh, and they got excited. They thought, that's it. Here we are. Here we're going to finally find out how it is that Jesus is going to end the Roman takeover of the land. What's the plan, Jesus? I think that the people will back you. I think that people love you. They owe you. You've healed a lot of people. So Jesus says, okay, here's how it's going to go down. We're going to stir things up first. And they're like, yay, let's go. And then they will get to me, they will pummel me, and they will kill me. Silence. Oh, but don't worry, that won't be the end. I'll come back to life. More silence. If some traumatic events happen and you see them, you can't unsee them. These traumatic examples or lessons that Jesus was giving couldn't be unheard. The disciples were stunned. They were not anticipating. And so that's why Peter, always Peter, That's why Peter gets up and tries to give Jesus, some political advice about how best to run a campaign to overthrow the Roman government. And Jesus calls him Satan. Satan means adversary, so I don't know if he was calling him the Satan or just an adversary, somebody going against him. And Jesus says, you're putting your mind in the wrong place. You're not thinking like God thinks. They had seen Jesus and really exercising power, powerful teaching, powerful influence in the community, powerful healing. And it was just so confusing for them to hear that Jesus wouldn't use that power, not the way they thought he should. They had seen him go toe-to-toe with synagogue leaders and win. And so they were like, why fold now? And why in this way? There's one more shocking thing which happens. This mysterious encounter on the mountaintop, this transfiguration. That's reserved only for the top of the class, those 3 disciples. Lest anyone doubt that Jesus was the real deal, he prepares a special show and tell, and only for them. And when it happens, this vision, which Jesus doesn't explain now or later to them, he usually would explain things like this. The disciples were just in shock. And what we are left with is that visual image of Jesus up on a mountaintop with 2 great characters of the journey of faith of the people of God. Moses, who represented the tradition of bringing the law, the tradition of taking the people out of Egypt from slavery. And then Elijah, who represented the best of the prophetic tradition, who challenged the people to depart from idolatry, to turn back to God. Here they were with Jesus, standing up, chatting, having a conversation. Jesus wasn't on par with them, he was above them. And how we know that is because then the cloud comes. Now they can't see a thing, but they can hear. And the voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved child. Listen to him." This turning point of the gospel, this unveiling of Jesus is important because the disciples would never see Jesus the same way again after this. And they'd have the choice now of staying with him or leaving him. This isn't that moment when you change your major in college. This isn't even that moment when you come back from college and you declare to your stunned parents that college isn't for you. This is the moment of an awakening. This is the moment when suddenly you know things differently. You are completely transformed. For the disciples, it's that little lecture in between the big 2 revelations that really do the job. Because Jesus says, now listen, because of the plan I have, if you really want to be my followers, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Now, if Jesus had had groupies who had followed him around for the thrill of seeing his miracles, that little lecture would have taken care of them. They would have left. If Jesus had had people who agreed with him on some things but not on others, this little lecture would surely have shoved them off the fence. If Jesus had had people who, on the edges of the group, were there just because this was fun, this is exciting, it's new, it breaks up the monotony of life, and they heard this little lecture, that would have been a sour note on which to leave. This is a turning point in the life story of Jesus, because Jesus makes it clear that from here on out, the serious journey that they were on would require an equally serious commitment. Deciding to learn from and to follow this teacher, Jesus, was going to be a full-time commitment. And he was telling them that they had to be all in or head back home. Because to deny themselves implied a rupture of expectations and of that family and community would have had with them. It was almost like a re-familying. They were getting brought together into a new family. There was a new identity. That's the new identity we talk about in baptism. We receive a new name in baptism. And so to take up the cross then for Jesus implied that the disciples would have to acknowledge that there's only one road we are taking. One which would place them in direct conflict with those in power. The cross, we see the cross all the time, and we forget perhaps that was the means of torture that the Romans used against anyone who dared contradict them or go against them. The Romans crucified people all the time, sometimes even hundreds, thousands of people at the same time. So Jesus was basically saying to them, it's not going to end well. And then to follow meant that more than just being a part of the pack. It meant that they had to be participants. This is not about cheering on our favorite sports team from the bleachers, but is rather about being on the field. Based on the first two things, denying yourself, carrying your cross. Following Jesus meant being unquestionably linked to Jesus and to his radical teachings. He sure wasn't making it easy, and he sure wasn't doing it to be popular. I wonder what have been moments in your faith life which have been turning points. I wonder when you came to that moment in your life where you saw Jesus differently, or you saw your commitment to be a follower of Jesus differently because of what happened in your life. As I was reflecting on this, I thought of several instances where I just saw following as a different thing. Being in the Philippines and meeting political prisoners who had been tortured, and they showed us their scars. Sleeping in a Chicago homeless shelter as part of an immersion effort when I was a seminarian. Meeting an undocumented immigrant in Indianapolis who was telling me, sort of casually, that he was cheated out of a whole week's pay by the person who had hired him. But you say, well, that's not really Jesus. You're just pointing out human evil or societal crisis or the face of injustice. Well, I think it does have to do with who Jesus is and who Jesus calls us to be. Because for the most part, we come to our turning point of following Jesus when we come face to face with the very Jesus we're trying to follow, or we see Jesus in the form of the very people Jesus would have embraced and done so lovingly, maybe to the jeers of the religious establishment or the political authorities. We come to a turning point when we come to terms that we ourselves are gay or transgender or our beloved relative is. We come to see Jesus differently when the person we love was passed over for a promotion because of sexism or racism. A turning point like this questions what we are holding on to, forces us to hold on to God, forces us to hold on to Jesus. And it means that there's going to be a cross to carry. Not suffering for the sake of suffering, but suffering which comes when we're on the right side of God's realm, where suffering comes for doing what is right, for declaring that the system which oppresses us is unjust and ungodly, for siding with the people who have the fewest people to support them. My college and mentor, Diamond Harges, is going to lead us in workshops, members of the church and some community leaders, as part of the project where we are considering God's call for us as individuals and as a church. And he gave me a preview of one of the workshops he's going to be leading. And he will be asking us 3 questions, which I think connect to that turning point of the Transfiguration. He will ask us, what are you trying to change? What are you willing to lose? Who are you willing to learn from? The way Jesus asked it was, are you willing to deny yourself? Are you ready to pick up the cross? And are you going to follow? I invite us to sit in the discomfort of the questions and to dream of the freedom that the answers will bring. Thanks be to God for God's word for us. Amen.